Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Elaine Jobson is a doer and a thinker. As a doer, Elaine has worked in the health and fitness industry for over 20 years, working for some of the industry's most well-known entrepreneurs in some of the fastest growing and largest chains of health clubs in the world. After a successful international career, Elaine joined Jets Fitness as COO in 2013. The first Jets opened in the Gold Coast in 2007 and was the first Australian gym with 24/7 access, no lock-in contracts, low fees and member-friendly policies. Since then, Jets has expanded to over 200 gyms across Australia, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Thailand, UK and Vietnam. Then in 2022, Elaine led a management buyout that encompassed 129 franchised clubs in Australia, as well as international franchise businesses in the UK and the Netherlands. As a thinker, Elaine is the author of the book High Performance Through Happy People, which explains how good culture and high performance can thrive and drive winning teams. She's also a speaker on leadership, building a most loved company, and using company culture as a competitive defense. You can find Elaine on LinkedIn. Elaine, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Brad. It's really, really good to be here.
Thank you. I'd like to start with an inflection point that changed the trajectory of your career. You're working in London as an executive in the fitness industry, and unbeknown to you, Nelson Mandela is on the phone with one of your heroes, who, by the way, is naked, and they're talking about a serious problem resulting from gangsters who've just been put in jail. And that call changed your life. Tell us about how that call happened, how that created an inflection point in your life and career, and how that next stage of your career impacted your mindset as a leader and CEO.
Goodness, well, that really was a phone call, wasn't it? So obviously the story you're referring to is within the fitness industry, and obviously you kindly say I've been here for 20 years. It's a little bit longer than that, but I've definitely been in leadership roles for 20 years. And what you're referring to is what happened with Richard Branson and how he ended up in the fitness industry. You know, all those years ago, when I was working in London for Fitness First, one of the biggest brands back then within the fitness industry, little did we know that across in South Africa, there was a situation unfolding with one of the larger brands out there. And what happened was these, as you call them, gangsters, as I've referred to them before, they were operating one of the largest chains in South Africa of 130 gyms, 700,000 members, 5,500 employees. This is a big business. But it was synonymous, this business, with having some quite kind of bad practices when it came to how they ran things. Yeah. And unfortunately, the way that they were doing business meant that they were taking a lot of cash and they were embezzling that cash out of the country. And anybody knows in South Africa, the volatility of the currency means that the government does not allow anybody to take the currency out of the country. So what happened was the government found out. They told the police. The police famously went and took these four gangsters out of their beds in a 4 a.m. dawn raid and put them into jail. And unfortunately, when that happened, that meant that the whole company went into liquidation. And that was quite significant, with so many people that were involved in obviously losing their jobs, and obviously all those members that lost access to their gyms. And, it became a very desperate and dire situation. And everybody was offered these, I was back in London with Fitness First, and, we were contacted, would you be interested in taking on this business in South Africa? And obviously back then it wasn't that long, it was only probably a decade later from when apartheid finished, so it was still a very volatile place to do business, South Africa, and there was very few people interested on an international stage in taking that company on. And things were getting so desperate. They were trying to keep this company open and running and operating, and those employees were rocking up to work and not being paid just to try and keep the business operating, looking for a buyer for it. And it was at this point that Nelson Mandela actually found out what was happening, and that all these people were working for nothing, trying to keep the place going. And I guess, he wanted to save this company and be able to get as many people, to stay in employment as he could. So he did, I guess, his only Nelson Mandela can do, which is, pulls out his black book and thinks, who can I call? He famously, called up Richard Branson. And, he knew that Richard loved a challenge. He loved, he was a brave businessman, and that he loved leisure. He had plenty of leisure businesses. So he just calls him up, and famously Joan, Richard's wife, answers the phone because she doesn't, unfortunately, realise at this point it's Nelson Mandela calling up, so she thinks it's maybe one of Richard's mates mucking around, and anyway, she realises that it really is Nelson Mandela, and in a complete, kerfuffle, she goes and runs to Richard with the phone to hand him the phone, saying, "It's Nelson Mandela, you've got to talk to him," and Richard was famously naked in the bath at this point, and very elegantly took the phone and had a conversation with Nelson Mandela about this situation, and heard about, as I say, the plight of these people, and been able to agree to take on that business, and that's effectively how he got into the fitness industry.
Nice.
Right from the get-go.
What an amazing story. So you take on the role, leave Fitness First, join Virgin Active, I think, as it become. Yep. What indicated to you just how bad the culture was at Virgin Active South Africa when it was acquired? Because cultures don't turn on a dime, right? So you get over there, culture's pretty bad. How did you get, and then what indicated that to you? But then how did you get the leaders who used to work for literal gangsters to turn the business around to the point where it became a Deloitte best company to work for, which is an amazing story?
Yeah, it was almost from the get-go. So a period of time did pass. So Richard acquired the business. He does what he does with all of his companies. So, there's like Virgin Management, and he sends all the Virgin people in, and they arrive with, the Virgin values and the books and, the manuals of how to do it all. And that's what they did. They arrived and turned it into a Virgin company by, changing people's uniforms and putting the Virgin brand over the door and doing all that training. And then they went away again. And it was actually over the next couple of years that Richard just started to hear some stories coming out that were perhaps indicating it wasn't quite as Virgin as it should be. And it was at that point that he got involved and decided to change out some of this, obviously the leadership there. And I was fortunate to be the recruit as the chief operating officer going in. So at that point, I arrived into the company. It was right from the get-go, Brad. Honestly, I walked in on day one. And obviously at this point, I haven't got the full context. I think I'm joining a Virgin company to learn how to be Virgin. I walk into the lobby, and there's two lifts, two elevators. And there's probably it's 9 o'clock in the morning, so there's like 40 people all crammed into this hot lobby waiting for these elevators. And in front of me, there's like one door, and in front of them is the other door. And then it just had a plaque on the side saying that. And I've been told to take this certain elevator up to the 5th floor. And then the elevator opens, I walk in, and I'm literally the only person walking in. And I'm wondering why everybody else isn't joining me. But this elevator only went to the executive floor on the 5th floor. Wow. Which I remember kind of thinking all these people like crammed like cattle trying to get into the other lift to get to the other 4 floors where they worked, and thinking this doesn't feel very Virgin,
Yeah. And
then I just noticed over that kind of those first few weeks that people weren't quite making my eye contact. The executive suite was down a corridor away from everybody else. It had like a bioscanner to get in. It was all very separated, which I know that that's not the way that Richard Branson runs companies. So questions started to kind of come into my mind of what was going on. And I kind of started to hear a bit about the background and the history and obviously what had happened to create this this opportunity for Richard to get involved in the business. And then the next thing was that I came across a situation which you'll never believe it, but the club managers, I mean, these are big clubs, you know, like 50, 60 people working in them.
Wow.
And a club manager had a line item on their P&L for effectively a budget for doing lie detector testing on their teams. Honestly, you couldn't make it up.
Wow.
So yeah, if you didn't think one of your team is telling the truth, then bring in the consultant, they'll hook them up to a lie detector test.
And what happens? And what happens if if I fail the lie detector test? Do we work on fingernails next? I mean, this is pretty brutal stuff, right?
It's terrible, yeah. I couldn't even believe it was a thing. But, you know, these are just obviously the hangover of the previous leadership that hadn't really been removed. And the reason is, you know, you're referring to the leadership, the reason it hadn't been removed is because there was, you know, those gangsters, you know, people attract people like themselves, hey?
Yep.
And, you know, those gangster leaders that were in place before, they had their depth of leadership that was still in place. You know, they hadn't removed those people. And you know what? It kind of suited them to a degree that things were still carrying on as they were, you know, that this kind of, you know, fear culture was in place because obviously when people are fearful, they'll follow orders. Yeah. And they found that quite useful. So, you know, one of the first things I had to do when I get in was obviously deal with that. And, you know, there was only one way to deal with a lot of it, which is to remove people. And I removed about 40% of the leadership.
Yeah, wow. And so there's one particular day you get out of the ivory tower because you're trying to understand what's happening, as I understand it, and you go out to one of the gyms and one of the staff is injured.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. So when I arrived and kind of figured out that, okay, my job isn't to learn how to do Virgin, it's to actually implement Virgin.
Yep.
And, you know, and I felt I'd had the best upbringing to do that, you know, having been raised on everything Virgin and understood the brand and read all the books and, you know, really understood the kind of the sentiment that came with the Virgin brand. So I did, when I arrived, I was given, you can imagine, so much license when you've got that Virgin brand to do some really cool things.
Yeah.
So I was implementing, you know, get your birthday off and, you know, have a free breakfast when you arrive and all these, you know, who's a foosball table in the corner. And none of it was getting traction. We were measuring our employee net promoter score, and nothing was improving. We were still in the very low teens, and I just couldn't figure it out. To be honest with you, Brad, I just didn't know. You know, what was it that we were doing so wrong that we couldn't get these people to feel happy? And it was at that point that I went down into the gym. I come from the gym, you know, I've worked my way up through the ranks and, you know, I always go back to the ground floor and, you know, to get in front of the customer, get in front of the people to understand what's going on. And it was at that point that I went down to the gym underneath the office and just to work a shift with the club manager. And, you know, during that shift, Sam, one of our maintenance guys, comes up and he gashed his arm. He'd kind of misshot with a screwdriver, and the screwdriver had cut his arm. And I'm terribly squeamish. I'm like, Sam, you need to just get yourself to the hospital. That looks like it needs some stitches. And off we packed him to the hospital. And it was a few days later that I was up in my office. I thought, well, I'll pop down and see how Sam's doing. Popped down there into the club and saw the club manager. I said, you know, where is he? She said, oh, I haven't seen him since. And I said, well, that's not acceptable. You need to go and make sure that he's okay.
Yeah.
So off we went. And in South Africa, in the townships, it's not as easy as kind of like, you know, this is your Google Maps is going to take you there. You're kind of going through there and you're shouting names and trying to, you know, people say, oh, it's down here. And eventually we kind of found his house, and his family said that they hadn't seen him either. And we eventually tracked him back to the actual hospital that we'd sent him to effectively 3 days prior. And unfortunately, we went into the hospital and we eventually found that he'd been sent up to the intensive care unit because with this injury to his arm, he'd been waiting in the waiting room for effectively 2.5 days.
Wow.
And, you know, the wound had become septic, septicemia had set in. He got blood poisoning, being rushed upstairs to the intensive care, and unfortunately had to have his arm amputated from the elbow down.
Wow.
Which was just shocking for me to know that had happened kind of on my shift.
Yeah.
You know, understanding. So I immediately kind of pulled the team together and say, look, how did this even happen? You know, what transpired to make this like a reality? And they said, well, it's quite easy. They said, we don't have medical aid. And I said, well, what's medical aid? And they said, oh, it's like a private medical insurance that companies give to their employees. We've never had it. We used to ask for it years ago, but with those gangster owners and never put it in. And obviously, being a English company taking over, we had no clue what it was. So obviously, you can imagine Virgin immediately put it in place. And I cannot tell you, Brad, the difference it made. I mean,
really?
as soon as we put the medical insurance in place, and just give it a bit of context, we were losing 1 or 2 people a month, our team members, to AIDS and TB.
Dying?
Dying.
Wow.
So you can imagine that how unsafe people felt about, if they got a cold or a cough, they were so afraid of having TB. They didn't want to go to the doctors because obviously the doctors couldn't afford the medications because they didn't have the private medical insurance. So often they were just coming into work. It was chaos.
Yeah.
So just putting in that basic medical insurance immediately made the teams feel so safe and so valued and so secure that, and this is where I kind of use Maslow's hierarchy now for building culture, because it doesn't matter about a birthday off or a foosball table if you don't feel safe and secure. And that's where I immediately went, I know what this is. I know what it looks like. Now I've got a foundation of safety and security. We started to put those other things in place, and that blew the lids off it, Then we got the kind of happiness coming through. But if we hadn't have done that, we'd have never have got the award.
Yeah, it's an amazing story to go from that to the best company to work for. I'd like to switch gears now. You led the management buyout of Jets a couple of years ago, acquiring 129 franchised clubs as well as the businesses in the Netherlands and the UK, as I understand it.
Yep.
In that, you transitioned from being a paid CEO to being an owner, which is quite a change. So congratulations. What did you learn through that process, and how is your mindset different now that you've made that transition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's by far one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, to be honest. Say back then in 2022, you got to remember the fitness industry had been through COVID for 2 years, where a lot of that time we were closed down.
Yeah.
So, performance was tough. We're running a franchise network here, so supporting all the owners through that time had been really difficult, as well as our own teams. And, from my leadership perspective, that was fifth gear all the way for a very long time. And when we came out the other side of that, we had a lot of uncertainty about the industry. We didn't really know whether people are going to come back to gyms or not. And, so we kind of came out of that gingerly kind of going, well, what's the new landscape? And it was at that point that I went, well, whatever this new landscape's going to be, I want to be in control of it. I've got to just fully, embed myself into navigating us back to growth. And, approach the private equity that owns us. And at that point, which is the Fitness and Lifestyle Group, and Greg Oliver, who's the CEO there, and said, look, I'm sure your strategy's changed the same as everybody's. We'd like to become independent so we could really just double down and focus on, our growth of our franchising business. They agreed that franchising wasn't a big part of their strategy going forward. So we just managed to kind of get an agreement to buy the business back, which sounds really easy, and it really wasn't that easy.
Yeah.
Because, raising investments in the fitness industry when it's just come out the back of COVID.
It's pretty hard.
In a franchise business, a franchise company, and the franchising's had its challenges in Australia as well.
Indeed.
It was not that easy, but anyway, we managed to get a deal done. And say what is different now is that, I mean, it's super exciting. We absolutely love it, and it means that we've got complete control of our future. We can really put all of our resources into the areas that we want to see improvement. We don't have to consider anybody but ourselves, as opposed to being in a family of many different brands. We can just be very single focused at growing Jets. And actually, it's almost like we're teenagers and we're being given the keys to the car for the first time. We're having a lot of fun with it.
That's so good to hear. That's so good to hear. And so I want to just double click back onto that question. So how's your mindset different So yeah, you feel like you've got the keys to the car. You're making some good changes, but correct me if I'm wrong. Most of the time, it is a different mindset, right? So how do you feel that your mindset is different now in the way that you view the world as a CEO compared to how it was before?
Yeah, it is different. It's not hugely different. I was always, I've always ran Jets like I own it.
Yeah.
I've always run every business like I own it because I've had the opportunity to work alongside a lot of amazing entrepreneurs. So I know what that entrepreneurial mindset looks like, and I've been able to obviously emulate that and navigate and filter that in some ways into execution, which is really where I come into my own. So I'd say that bit was kind of reignited, that I had the opportunity to really run with the ball. So it was everything. I've always felt responsible for running this business and for its performance. That didn't change. I just had the extra entrepreneurial bit really added back in to say, I can decide now, I am responsible, and we can really navigate this to the extent that we want to. So I've definitely felt an increase in ambition and drive for the brand that was a little bit hindered before.
Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you. So let's transition to your book, High Performance Through Happy People. Came out recently, a few months ago. Congratulations. A great book, having read it. And sometimes people, as someone who reads a lot of business books, sometimes people write business books that are regurgitated, but this isn't one of those. There's certainly some gems in there, and I would encourage listeners to grab it and to look for those gems. I'd like to start, you've already mentioned Net Promoter Score. So I'd like to start with Net Promoter Score from the book. You use that to drive your BHAG, or your Big Hairy Audacious Goal, a phrase coined from Jim Collins. And you use that to drive day-to-day action. Tell us about how you utilised Net Promoter Score to drive your BHAG.
Yeah. So our vision was to be Australia's most loved gym. Now, as soon as you put love into a vision, it can feel super ambiguous.
Yeah.
So I've always been very, very disciplined on adding very measurable metrics to that. And we needed a way to measure like the love of our customer and the love of our people. And that's where Net Promoter Score was the perfect opportunity. I was introduced to Net Promoter Score way back when, in 2007, when I was at Virgin Active in South Africa, because we were looking for a measure, and that's when it would really just come into its own. And I got the opportunity to actually do some work with Frederick Reichelt, who's obviously the founder of NPS, and understand how to implement it into the environment of gyms, because it's very different to retail and hospitality. So I kind of came into Jets understanding about NPS and the power that it had. So we immediately put NPS into this business. And NPS is a really useful tool, but where the magic happens is empowering the teams to take the feedback and then make change.
Yeah.
And because we've got a franchise network here, they weren't quite sure whether we would be able to empower the teams like I could at Virgin to be able to actually make changes. But they just loved it because we've got really people-centric leaders in the clubs. They just want to get their members happy. Whatever those issues were that were coming through with members, they just wanted to fix them. So
which is the operational mindset. The people who are working in the gyms, they want to see people happy. So it's a very effective measure on that. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And they also, so we don't focus so much on the actual score. We just focus on fixing members' issues.
Yeah.
And that in turn, the outcome is that the score goes up. So otherwise, if you focus a lot on the score, you can end up where the team are really tempted to try and kind of manipulate it.
Oh, yeah.
Saying, it probably happened to you, Brad, where you go into like a service-orientated business and they go, hey, Brad, you might get a survey through tonight. It'll ask you if I'm a 9 or a 10. Can you please give me a 10? Which is terrible experience for a customer to have. So we never wanted that pressure on the teams for the score. We just say, just improve it, just move it upwards.
Yeah.
And just remove your detractor comments.
Yeah. 2 quick points. First of all, there's a company here in Perth called iiNet. They were an internet provider. They got sold to TPG. But iiNet used Net Promoter Score And when I dug into their ASX or their listed reports, they connected every 1 point in NPS increase with $1 million bottom line profit. And they'd done enough work to be able to connect that. They were very much about better service than the competition and having customers who love them. So I do love the NPS. But the second point is, are you familiar with NPS 3 that Fred Reicheld's brought out recently? It's a really, if you're not, and I'd probably say this to listeners, it's a really great evolution from Fred that probably came out about a year or 18 months ago, where he connects it to revenue. So it's focused on hard numbers. That means that people can't do that hack or users can't do that hack where, can you give me a 10? And they're using kind of persuasion to get people to rate them higher. So
yeah, that's right. I mean, when I think back to, say, Virgin Active was where I really understood about NPS and the power of it.
Yeah.
And we used it to measure through the improvements that we were making. And one of the things we did was been able to actually do our internal analysis to see what's the financial impact into the movement of this Net Promoter Score. And because we did it over almost 5 years, we had enough data to be able to see that for every 10 points we moved the eNPS, so we made our people happier, we moved retention by 1%. And for retention 1% in that company, it was hundreds of thousands of pounds that we were improving. So, in fact, the word got out within Virgin that what we were doing, and obviously people could see the performance. We were the most profitable company that Richard owned out of his 140 companies.
Wow.
And, people wanted to know why. And, one of the things that I did was create a presentation that said the financial imperative of NPS, because, we'd done that difficult job of connecting it back to profit, revenue.
What a wonderful segue to my next question. From your book, what's the difference between good profit and bad profit?
The world. A world of difference. Yeah, again, it fascinates me that, there aren't more leaders of companies really obsessing over this, because I've seen it unfold in so many different ways. But yeah, essentially good profit is profit that's made at the enhancements of the relationship with the customer, and bad profit's the reverse. So profit that's made at the detriment of the relationship with the customer. And we've all been through that, haven't we? We've all kind of been in with a relationship with a business as a customer and come across things in our small print in contracts, or just you try and return something and then you find out that the returns policy is super limited, or you just find that there's those small print that means that there's some added costs that you didn't really take into consideration. They're all bad profits, and what happens is companies can get so seduced by them because they show up on the P&L the same as everything else. They're just another dollar in, but what they can't see is the exponential impact of that, the negative impact of, what about the, that relationship, that customer that actually thought you were really good and now is actively talking about you, sharing those stories about bad profit and the things that you do, and that obviously erodes over time. So let's say you can still get, companies that are profitable through bad profit, but the question is how sustainable is that over time?
And probably not so much. It reminds me of a quote, short-term gain equals long-term pain. And also it makes me think of something from your book where you said that 90% of the conversations in a company are about improving the company's profit. And it focuses on that short term, which is, as you described, bad profit. I'd like to draw a quote from your book. As long as profit is the priority, people and culture can only be runners-up in the race. Please tell us more about this idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's a continuation really of the good profit, bad profits. The thing is, when it comes to culture and looking after your people, I think most companies, most leaders would know that that's really important. And then you kind of get into the world of, okay, how much is that focused on actually genuinely in the time that leader's dedicating to their work?
Yeah.
And so often it's like they talk the game, they're doing the right things, they've got the employee handbook and they've got the values on the wall and they've gone through the workshops, and then the rubber hits the road. The rubber hits the road where a decision needs to be made. We can make more money or we can impact the people. And most of the time, unfortunately, they'll go for making more money over the sacrifice of the people. And it's in those moments that you know whether a company is truly culture-centric or whether they're just kind of giving it a bit of lip service.
Like a moment of truth, right?
A moment of truth.
I spent a few years writing a book about onboarding new hires. And you've got an interesting take on that in your book. Please tell us about the relationship journey from flirting, falling in love. We've already spoken about naked today, so I don't know. I'll start again. Flirting, falling in love, being in love, staying in love, and then crazy in love. It's a really interesting take that goes beyond the 90 days. Also, please explain why being in love 4 months to 1 year, being in love, is the danger zone.
Yeah, so this actually transpired out of our vision. So our vision is to be obviously Australia's most loved gym. And what we found is that with our team members, as well as actually our members, it's a relationship. At the end of the day, whichever way you look at it, you think about somebody coming for an interview, it's like a first date. And it's like, you're all putting your best foot forward, you're smiling, you're saying all the right things, you're being super nice to each other. It's like a flirtation that goes on. We're trying to sell the company, the team, the potential team members trying to sell their skills and their attributes. So we call that the flirting stage. And so then as soon as you kind of come on board, you come into what we call the falling in love stage. And we are totally aware, and this again is human behavior, that those first 90 days, everyone kind of comes into the business, they're motivated, they're excited about the role, they really bought into the vision, they're thinking about all the opportunities that they're going to have, and there's a bit of rose-tinted glasses being worn.
Yeah.
But we're also mindful that that doesn't last. That really high motivation, excitement is not sustainable, just like when, I'm sure, Brad, you've dated in your time, and, you first, all that kind of falling in love phase is so wonderful, but it doesn't sustain for the 10 years,
Unfortunately.
So we just recognize that, when people need different things from us at different times. So when they're really excited and they're coming in what they call the falling in love stage, we do a lot of hard skills training because we recognize we don't need to be motivating them. They're already really motivated. We need to give them expectations, what's the job, so that when that does dip, which is usually around that 90 days into what we call the being in love phase. So when they're really making a decision, is this for me long term? I want to stay in the business. Actually now that the rose-tinted glasses come off, is it okay? Is it somewhere I say I want to be? And at that stage, also, we recognize that they do need to have other things like the feeling of belonging, and this goes back to Maslow's. So at that point, we make sure that they're connected with other team members, that they're participating in social stuff, that they feel that, they're really valued and they belong to that team. And then they go on to, the staying in love phase, which is usually over a year. And that's different because that's when we tend to start taking our team members for granted.
Yeah.
That whole thing, long-term relationship. Do you still send her flowers? Do you still, take her out on dates? Well, we make sure that obviously those team members have now gone to the top of Maslow's, which is about them contributing back in and being able to actually kind of participate in the business a bit more. So we kind of have it all nutted out.
So you've mentioned Maslow's hierarchy a few times. When people are in the being in love stage, 4 months to 1 year, as well as the other bits, that's the danger zone. And that's when you're really focusing in on the Maslow's hierarchy. Where are they? Which again came from understanding the base level of the Maslow's pyramid back in South Africa. Yeah. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs, beyond what you just said, what I loved in the book is that you said every team member fits somewhere on that. So you can pick a name and you can look at the pyramid and you can say that person's sitting right there now. How can leaders use this assessment to elevate their direct reports, bringing them or working to bring them to the next level, do you think?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, obviously you have to have a bit of conversation with the team member to actually ask them some questions to investigate. But most people that are leading a team will know intuitively where they are. And they can obviously move up and down as well. So we have different tools and skills matrix to kind of check where people are at. But generally, those first 90 days are about making people feel safe and secure in the role. What's expected of me? What's my job description? When will I get paid? Where's my uniform? All of those things. And once those are established and we move on to those higher needs, to say feeling that belong and being able to compete. So, we'll see that's when those kind of more competitive, where am I on the league table? Am I getting feedback on how I'm doing? So with our leaders here, we just make sure they check in and ask some questions around that. Brad, have you met other people? Are you socializing with anybody outside of the office? Are you participating in some of the competitions that we have going on? So you just have to obviously have those conversations. But I say most importantly is those higher needs where we've got team members that have been with us for a long time, where you're actually getting the leaders to ask the questions of, now that you've been here a while, what else would you like to participate in that you feel that you can add back into making us even better? It's that ability to participate, so that kind of real top of the Maslow's pyramid and contribute.
And that was actually my next question, was about self-actualization being at the top. And so self-actualization is how can you contribute? How can you bring back to the business? So can you give us an example of how that actually might be used, or you've seen it used by a team member?
Yeah, so these are usually what we call our crazy in love people.
Yeah.
So been with us a couple of years plus, and they are kind of giving us EMPS 9 and 10. So they're really engaged, living the brand and living the values. And that's where we really identify that they are in that self-actualization stage, that they really are emulating what the values are all about. At that point, we want to really engage them in something that's bigger than themselves. So we might actually get them involved with a project like designing the next gym, or coming up with programming, or being able to mentor other people through. So they might be actually taking training sessions or going out into the gyms and actually, analyzing how we can do things better and then converting those into projects. So they really become part of who we begin to be over time as well. So it's a real kind of contribution back in.
I love that, because one of the things that I've seen before is when people get bored, they start looking for other jobs, and sometimes it's just they're just looking for a new challenge, or they're just not busy enough. So I love that like the way you've kind of connected those dots back to that. It's fabulous. The book that I'm working on now is about building a better business instead of a bigger business, and so the working title is "Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better." For you, in your experience and perspective, what would you say is a better business? How would you describe a better business?
Yeah, I've always been a huge fan of Kaizen, the whole Toyota Japanese approach to business. It's that kind of constant improvement. And I think as leaders, we need to always run the companies like they are brand new. You have to constantly be pushing the boundaries. And I think better business will always come from the leadership. And we're talking about those staying so crazy in love people, and those people with you a long time, and how you keep them engaged. Well, that all depends on the ability of the leader. So the better business needs to be about challenging the leaders to always be better. And I say to my own team that if when it comes to your long-term team members, then you better make sure that you're constantly learning, because you need to be always teaching them things. Every single interaction should be about making them better. And if the minute that you can't do that, you're irrelevant as a leader. Why do they need you if you're not able to make them better? So I really push the boundaries, and they say my inner circle know this, that I'll always keep them in that, on the cusp of that learning zone, so that, not too stressed, but they need to be always growing, because they owe that responsibility back to their people. So that's how I'd answer that. Better business is better leadership.
That's wonderful. Thank you. What is a book that you might recommend for our audience that isn't your book or my book?
I've got so many. I think, maybe step away from the obvious ones, like, the 7 Habits and Good to Great and all of those, which are amazing books. There's a book called, which is by Marcus Buckingham, and it's called First Break All the Rules.
Yes.
And you might be familiar with it, but there's some real alternate thinking as to how you do business in that book, and especially how you lead, which is all obviously research-based, and which I love books which are, research-based. But, I've actually changed the way I lead people through that book. There's things like, he has this thing about playing favorites. So you kind of, you list down the page, all of your team members in who's your best performer to your worst performer. And then next to it, you list down all your team members depending on how much time you spend with them. And then you draw the lines between them. And the idea is that you don't cross the lines, because you should be spending most of your time with your best performers, because if you can get, that piece of time into your top performers, exponentially they're going to give you more. And I think as leaders, we can be a little bit guilty of spending time with our not so great performers, trying to make them better. And I think that's just an absolute amazing concept.
Oh, that is a gem in itself. I love it. I have read another one of Marcus Buckingham's book, 9 Lies About Work. Same kind of ideas. These things that we think that are sacred cows, but are actually completely untrue when you analyse the data.
Exactly.
How can people learn more about you and your business?
Well, I think, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So, if you want to learn more about me personally, then LinkedIn's a really good place to go. I love connecting with new people. So, yeah, love to do that. Obviously, reading the book, I've tried to be as transparent and as vulnerable as I can in writing that book. So it'll definitely give people a bit of an insight into who I am.
Well, I think you succeeded in that mission. Again, the book is High Performance Through Happy People. And definitely worth a read for the gems that are in there, that you've shared a few of them today with us. What haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
I think we've done a pretty solid job at covering off a few things. I think, for me, it starts and ends, with the culture, but I think it's sometimes when we talk about culture and leadership, it can end up in that, dare I say it, the fluffy word. It can end up in that kind of fluffy world. And the whole point of me writing that book was that, the reason to look after your people and to drive culture, and obviously, is to drive performance. The two are so intrinsically linked, and it's such a simple concept, but seems to really struggle to get the airtime when you actually put leaders together. And they say, so many of those conversations around profit, but profit is just an outcome. Profit is just what spins off what the people are doing. And they said, unless you work in like a deep manufacturing plant, the chances are that people are responsible for your performance and your profit. So, my quest, or my request today would be, how's about you put more of that focus into your people and your culture, and really, making sure their happiness is taken care of, because I think you'll see an uptick on that performance.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elaine. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today with the audience. It's been an awesome chat and great to get to know you. And I'm super grateful for you spending time with us today.
Oh, thanks, Brad. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.